mercy, look at how the time goes.
And welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. Today I have with me my guest, Mr. Jeff Hogue. He is the voice of the History of the Cold War podcast. How you doing, Jeff?
Great. How are you doing today, John?
I'm hanging in there. It's late in the evening here, and it's early in the morning over there. How's things in California?
Yeah, things here in California are pretty good. It's been a little bit colder than usual this year.
Okay.
And, it's kind of weird. These past 2 years, we've gotten a lot of rain. And I'm not quite sure if that's because this is how the weather's supposed to be or not. And when I say that, it's because when I first moved here about 15 years ago or so, because I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, the weather was really hot all the time. And California was actually going through like a once in a 10,000 year drought or something like that.
Now, when you say it was hot, when you say it was really hot all the time, what kind of temperatures were you talking about then?
It was probably like most days, it was like in the low 80s, like on an average day, even in the winter.
Okay.
And then I remember, especially even the first year I moved here, there were a couple of days in December where it was like 100 degrees.
In December?
And in December, it was like 100 degrees. I remember, and the heat would last, it would start in, into late October, November. We were still getting days in the 90s and the hundreds. And then it would start cooling down in December normally, most years I was here. And then you normally get like January, February were like normal weathers. But even then, for me, it was like 70 something degrees. It would drop down. But by March, it normally would start hitting back up into the 80s.
Right.
And this year, we've probably so far only had a couple of days that got into the 80s. And it's been nice because it's not brutal, but I'm just not used to it now. And I think it's because, it's not Arizona yet, but it was kind of more like Arizona than it is today. And I think it's because of the amount of rain.
Now you're talking about the Los Angeles area, correct? Or
yes, yeah. So I live in just south of Irvine.
Okay.
So roughly the Los Angeles metro area in Orange County. So.
I'm just trying to think of that. 100 degrees in December. Good Lord.
Yeah. That was like, I had just arrived. I remember I was going for a job interview and I didn't have a car yet. And I took a bus up to, I forget what it was. It was someplace outside LA to get an interview. And I remember I had a suit on and I used to wear ties. Back when I lived in New York, I had a whole collection of ties and I continued to wear ties here in California for maybe like a year or two. And then I just gave it up. So now I have this closet full of all these great ties. I just never wear them because
collecting dust.
it's too hot to wear those ties. So I don't wear. Well, and especially the nature of my work changed and everything else. But
so in the last 15 years, you have noticed a meaningful change in weather in Southern California.
I'd say in the last 2 years.
The last 2 years, okay.
The last 2 years, it's gotten a lot cooler.
Yeah.
Last year, actually even maybe 3 years, now that I think about it, but especially these last 2 years have gotten a lot cooler. We've gotten a lot more rain. There's a trail wilderness behind my house, and there's a little lake that's there, and at one point it dried all the way down to, it was like some program off National Geographic, it dried all the way down, killed all the fish, it stank. It was it went all the way down to the mud and it just cracked, right? It was just desert.
Yeah.
And then it started raining again. And now the lake has come back and it's super high. It's almost, because there's a trail that goes by it. It's almost to the trail. So
interesting. Yeah. California is just weird. It's just, wow. I don't know. I guess people could say the same thing about the place where I live. I'm here in Norway, and when we lived up north before, well north of the Arctic Circle, and we had one summer. I believe it was the summer of 2012. I can't remember. I think it was 2012. There was not a single day above 16 degrees Celsius, which is about I don't know, not even 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was unusually cold. And there was very little sunlight that year and just strange. So that is, I guess that would be no pun intended, the polar opposite
yeah.
of what you guys were experiencing in Southern California at the time with the extreme heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one quick question for you because I wanted to ask you this question.
Yeah.
So we have a mutual friend how we started talking, Solveig, who lived in America, and now she kind of goes back and forth. I think her deal is like every 10 years or so, she switches up the country. But how did you, as an American, as an expat, end up in Norway? Because most American or expats that you hear about are like in Thailand or the Philippines or someplace warm. So I was wondering, like, how you, as an American, ended up in Norway.
Okay. My wife is Norwegian.
Okay, that's a simple answer.
That's the short answer. And then I had a powerlifting friend. When I moved to Chicago, I met Ed Cohen. Anybody in the powerlifting world knows him as the Michael Jordan of powerlifting. He's the top dog, and he's a legend. And his girlfriend at the time was they're still together, but at the time they were just boyfriend and girlfriend. She's Norwegian, and her and my wife had known each other for a few decades, 20 years. So she introduced me to my wife, who was there on vacation to visit her. This is back in the late 90s, 97, 98, something like that. And we ended up dating. We got married in 2001. We lived in the Chicago area for a couple of years, and then we ended up moving here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Long story short,
that makes sense.
There's a lot of interesting aspects to that story, but that's the short version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm originally from Ohio, small town Ohio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you're originally from New York, you said.
Yeah. So I'm from Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo. Okay.
Which, I don't know if you're familiar with Buffalo, but we're
I am. Yeah.
We're on the other. You should be because you're from Ohio. So we're on the other end. Of the state there. Yeah. And we're we have like a little bit different culture than obviously like New York City. Yeah. Because anytime I introduce myself to people, most people are like, they think New York City. Right. And it's like, Buffalo is very different than New York City. And it's like 6 hours away from New York City. I think of Buffalo as the slightly shy cousin of New York City. Yeah, and especially even people in New York City, like they kind of look down on us because they're like, "Oh, you guys are like," they look at us as like country people, which is ridiculous to me because it's like we're still a city. We're just not you. We're just not New York City. Yeah, we're just not 6 million strong, right? Like it's you can't. You guys are. It's an impossible yardstick, right? Because it's the biggest city in the country. To judge us against, but and I think we have a lot more in common with places like Cleveland and or Baltimore than we do with obviously New York City. Right. I mean, we're a good sized city, especially when I was living there. I mean, obviously we've had a lot of people move away from Buffalo because of industries. That left, but myself included. What is it that took you out of Buffalo into California, or did you have a stop in between? So for me, my brother had come out to California in the early 2000s. Like, I think he had moved here in 2002 or something like that. And I was in college at the time. And after I got done with college, I kind of knew I wanted to do something else. I wanted to get out of Buffalo. I didn't see a lot of economic opportunity there. Plus, I was young and I wanted to do something exciting. And I think a lot of young people just want to move to someplace new. And I had come to visit my brother a couple times in California, and obviously that was really nice. And then I'd always the weird thing is I always had a dream of going to California. I was growing up in Buffalo, the cold and snow. That was the last place I wanted to go to. Again, it's more of the familiar, so I wanted more of the exotic. So California was the exact opposite of that. Plus, it has its own mystique of Hollywood. There's a lot of history here, a very different history than upstate New York. So, there's almost like a cliche story of the small town or the smaller town guy or girl kind of packing up with no contacts in California, especially in Southern California, but they just go there and they try to get their feet planted and get started with something. Yeah. So that was pretty much it. I mean, I literally, like, my brother obviously lived out here, and I stayed with him for like 9 months before I found my own place. But I literally had like $400 maybe.
Wow.
$400 in my bank account. My dad gave me $50 before I left. My brother bought my one-way plane ticket, and I had 2 suitcases. That was
one-way plane ticket. So that's real commitment right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then at points it was real. Especially those first 4 years were probably the hardest years of my life.
How so?
Well, because other than my brother, I didn't know anyone. Right?
So you had to start your social network from scratch.
From scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that's why I really respect people, or even immigrants who move to different countries, right? Because, I mean, you're a little bit different because you're lucky. I mean, at least you had your wife to rely on. But I mean, but they have even more of a challenge because you don't speak the language, right? Me, at least, I had access to the language, and I wasn't, things were obviously still different, but you have like no social safety net, right? You have no contacts. If something goes wrong, you're 100%. I mean, again, I had my brother, but that was it. And so if anything else happened, or if he couldn't help me with it, I was basically on my own.
But did you feel a sense of adventure in the sense that, okay, you're coming there with pretty much no money in your pocket, no social network, but you're also coming with a chance to redefine yourself. There were no expectations and kind of...
That is true, yeah. I did have a sense of adventure in that, like, I think I was very young. I was very ambitious.
How old were you?
I was 22.
Okay, so a few years out of high school then, yeah.
Yeah, I just graduated from college, right? And I thought I could take on the world. And, because I was like, well, I got a college degree. But the thing is, I didn't realize is that the school I went to, which was a good, like probably one of the best schools in my local area. Yeah. People in California had no idea what Niagara University was.
Yeah.
And when I said that to them, it was like just saying like, oh, I went to like Chickenville University, right? Like people, they're like, what's the relevance? Like they don't know anything about it.
What's your degree in?
Yeah, so my undergrad was in history, and I think that was the other thing is I got a degree in history. I had not really, I think that like a lot of, like, when you're young, my brother tried to warn me about some of these things, but it was, you just don't, I grew up a lot during those 4 years too.
Sure.
I mean, not that I didn't grow up during college or didn't experience things, but like, I guess my expectation was, I thought it was going to be a little bit more easier than what it was actually going to be. And because I just expected to move to California, get a good job, and like start living my life. Yeah. And it's like, no, man, like you don't have any work experience. You don't have any real credentials. You got a degree in history, which is great, but it's not like, it's just like it's a mandatory kind of thing to have a college degree. It's not a plus of any way, right? Because you're competing against a bunch of other people that have degrees, right?
Yeah. So how did you use that degree? Did you get a teaching job, or did you have to get a job totally that had nothing to do with history in order to just get started working in California? How did you get involved in the workforce?
Sure. So I got involved in the workforce. So I started applying to a bunch of jobs. I eventually got a job at Target. And I was like, oh my God, like what the hell? Like I got a college degree and working at Target with a bunch of other people who just got high school degrees. And I apologize if that sounds like condescending. I don't mean it to be, but again, at the time, I think I was a little privileged and short-sighted. And, I was just like, well, what am I doing? And then I ended up from there, I got a job at a grocery store. So I was working like these types of jobs that I would have had back in New York. And, at one point I was like, well, should I quit and go back home? But then I was like, then why the hell would I do this?
Well, there's that word quitting. Nobody wants to do that.
Nobody wants to quit. Right. Yeah. So I was just like, I just said to myself, I'm going to get through this. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to get through it. And what happened with me is, wildly enough, I had just a bunch of little stories, in terms of just events that were pretty wild. I got a corporate job. I got my very first corporate job. I worked in a mailroom. And when I was in the mailroom, I had these other idiots that I worked with. And these guys were just like, they're just insane, right? And they were just like, we would deliver the mail every day. And these guys were just like, I don't know how to say it, but they would just sexually harass the women that worked in the workplace, right? They would say like inappropriate things.
That sounds so bold. That sounds so bold.
Yeah.
That someone kind of at the bottom rung of the corporate structure, they're in the mailroom, but they had the nerve to actually.
Yeah, they would just say these crazy things to these girls. And
how'd they get away with that?
You know, they would just get away with it. And then I remember, you know, the other thing they did, which should have alerted me right away was, you know how as a guy, right? Like I would be like, we would have, you know, female coworkers, John, or you know, even in high school, right? You'd have different girls that you know in a group, right? And you'd say, well, John, do you think Sarah is attractive or whatever, right? You'd ask about her as a guy, right? And guys would share their opinions or whatever, right?
Sure.
But it was always a thing where it was, I guess, like an unspoken rule, and I think most guys would attest to this. It would stay amongst you guys, right? You
well, the locker room talk stayed in the locker room.
Exactly.
In other words,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, like the one day, these guys asked me on my opinion, and I didn't say anything like, like our current president had said. Like it was very tame. They asked me like between this girl and that girl in the office. I think the one girl was named Penny. I can't remember the other girl's name. Which do you think is more attractive, right? And I was like, well, you know, honestly, I think Penny's more attractive or whatever. And it was like it. Like I didn't go into detail or anything like that.
Right.
But these idiots went back and told these two girls, these three guys, that between these two girls, this is who I thought was more attractive. And of course, the girl that I said that I thought was less attractive than her friend, it caused a problem, right? Now she had like this thing against me, and I was like, why did you guys do that? And they thought it was like a joke.
That's just something that dudes are supposed to know. The locker room talk stays in the locker room. Yeah.
And because you would never put another dude in that kind of situation. And then like, so I just like stopped communicating with them, and it just kept escalating. And then it got to the point where they asked me like, hey, would you have sex with Penny? Right. And at the time, like the Iraq war was going on and everything.
Yeah.
And I had said, no, I would not. And they were like, well, why wouldn't you? Right. You don't think, you said the other day she was attractive.
They're just intentionally trying to trap you in something.
Yeah. So then
why wouldn't you?
I said, well, yeah. So I said, the reason I wouldn't is because her husband's away. She's married and her husband is away. He's away fighting, right, for the country, right? And I feel like it would be like a double negative. Like, not only are you sleeping with a married woman, which is wrong, but you're also like sleeping with her husband is away fighting for her freedom. So like, I would just feel bad about myself on two levels. And these guys are like, "Oh, what are you, gay, man? You're like, what are you? They
sound like a bunch of cavemen."
Like, exactly. And I was like, so I get to the point. I was just like, you know what? Forget this. I can't do this. So I go to HR. Right. And I'm like, this is the situation. This is what's going on. And now, by the way, I should mention, at the time I was attempt to hire for this position. So I'd only been working there for like 3 months.
Okay.
And they're like, what? And so she like, I remember the HR lady turns around and she pulls out this thing. She starts writing all these names down and she starts documenting all the stuff that I'm telling her. So then guess what happens? I get fired. They let me go. Yeah, so they terminate me, and they tell me they're going to take care of these guys, right?
Well, that got turned around awfully quick.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Well, how the hell did... Yeah, so, because I think they were like, well, they didn't want me, because I could maybe make a case against the company for what was going on there.
So they wanted to get a step ahead of you then, and
Exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, I learned in my life, in corporate America, like, HR, you think HR is there to protect the employees, but unfortunately, in most scenarios, HR is actually there to protect the company against lawsuits.
Now, I've been here in Norway for almost 20 years, and one of the biggest things I've noticed since I've been here is that the work environment, everything when it comes to how HR operates, when it comes to workers' rights and protections and the value of the worker, Norway is light years ahead of the United States. I mean, I don't know. I can't picture a case like that happen. I can't picture there being a case like that in Norway. It just wouldn't happen. It would have been handled the way it should have been handled.
Yeah, and that was it. The thing is, I think it was I won't say it just in case I got it wrong, but that there was that bank doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
That was one of the banks that got wiped out in the financial crash. So this was like, and this was, this was like right before that in like 2007 or something like that. 2006, maybe 2007. But then basically I lost that job and I started looking, I was just desperate for a job, and I started looking at applications, jobs on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And, it was just, I mean, I have a number of other stories about that time, but I got a job with this guy out of his apartment, and he taught me how to sell. He was running his own small business out of his condo. I should say it actually was a condo, and I would just show up.
He wasn't a drug dealer, was he? That sounds like a
no.
I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing.
The thing is, in the beginning, it sounded super sketch, and I told my brother about it too.
Yeah, because right on the surface, the way you described it, it sounded real sketch.
Yeah, so. real sketch, right? And I was like, this is what's going on, and my brother's like, dude, like you're going to work on some guy's like condo, and you're like. And I was like, he was, especially even the first paycheck, I was afraid like maybe this guy won't pay me, like maybe the paycheck won't clear, but everything was legit. Like it was just, because this was like his third, it was equipment leasing and financing.
Okay.
And
what kind of equipment?
We would do any kind of equipment. So we did everything from like office cubes to computers to trucks.
Okay.
All kinds of stuff, right? And we worked as a middleman, as a broker, right? And he actually did the finance part. He just taught me how to cold call, how to get people that were find people that were interested in the service, and then I'd hand it off to him, and then he would take it to the next steps. And he paid me pretty good. He paid me pretty much like a cash bonus. So it was like my bonus was like off the books, right? So that he didn't have to pay taxes on it either. So it was like
sounds like a good setup.
Oh, it was. Yeah. It was great. And I was with him for like maybe a year and a half until he decided the taxes in California were too high, and he wanted to move to Texas, right? So he moved to Texas. Now, my brother had done very well for himself in corporate America as well. Okay. And my brother wanted to start his own business. And he saw that I did very well with this guy and what we were doing, equipment leasing and financing. So we started our own equipment leasing and financing business, and we did that for about a year, but then it was just a complete disaster because we started our business in late 2006, and obviously the financial crash happens in 2008, right? Oh. So we had loans that so I was finding customers, and we had people that needed capital, but the banks wouldn't fund them. Right. They just wouldn't do it. And we didn't know what was going on. We're like, why won't you did the credit check? You did. I mean, first of all, it was hard to get customers. We had you could tell too, something was wrong because we had a lot of people that were bankrupt, or people who had a lot of bankruptcies in the past. Yeah. And you tell them like, well, if you don't have good credit, like I can't get you processed, but they would apply anyways. Right. Or they would try to come back in like multiple times. Yeah. And so that business failed, and then I worked a bunch of other odd jobs. I thought about going back to school. At one point, I was just like, especially after the crash, I was like, because I had thought about working in finance, and I've been equipment leasing and financing, and I was like, I don't want to do the finance deal. This is obviously the world's falling apart there, and I worked at the engineering consulting firm with Solvay. And then I was like, well, what am I doing with my life, right? It's like 4 years later, I'm still like, I don't have a direction path. And then I got
But didn't you get a certain amount of self-confidence in that process? Because what you've described over the last couple of minutes now has been a journey where you started with almost nothing, literally nothing. And then you work your way up to, working with people who are self-employed, getting your foot in the door of corporate America and whatnot. That's a wealth of experience right there. So it wasn't a total loss. I would imagine.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't wasted time. In other words, you were learning.
I think in retrospect, it wasn't wasted time. But I think when you're in the middle of it, you're like, okay, well, I want my life to be here. I'm not there yet. What are the next steps to take to get there? And I thought, well, that's why I decided for a career change. I thought I was going to go into history or go back to school. And I did. I got my master's degree in history. but in doing that, I was also working during the day, and I lost my job at the consulting firm. They had let me go. And then I ended up getting a job at a software company, working sales in a software company.
Now, what year was this?
This was 2011.
Okay.
I started working at a software company. And then I started making really good money in the software company. And I was like, well, you know, why? And I learned a lot more about academic life and what that would cost, the sacrifices that would be needed. Because, you know, most academics, unless you're at like one of the top universities like Yale or Harvard or Oxford, and you have to go to one of those schools, obviously, to teach at one of those schools, right? Like, I mean, I went to Long Beach State, which is a great school. I enjoyed my time there. I had great professors. I learned a lot. Not only, and the funny thing is, I felt I learned more about life in grad school than I did as an undergrad, and about preparing for the future. I took a lot away from that. But I would also say, because of the way that academia is set up, if I tried to get like there's nobody coming from Long Beach State and teaching at Harvard or Oxford, right? Because that's not the way that system works.
And at that time, you wanted to go further into teaching, correct? Is that why you took your master's?
So I wanted to, initially, before I started making money doing software sales in the day, I wanted to go into teaching, because that was what I thought. I was like, well, I guess that's what I'm going to do, right? Yeah. Because I was always great at history, obviously, and I always scored really high, and I was always at the top of my class. And
that's where your interest was, of course.
That's where my love, that's where my passion was. Yeah. And I was just like, well, you know, and even at one point when I was looking at going into different PhD programs, I was going to have to go on a stipend, and the stipend is like less than $20,000 a year. And at this point, I'm making like 60, and I was like,
but that
doesn't make any sense.
Isn't all
for me to like? Well, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just want to clarify something or clear something up. Isn't all undergrad education tuition free in California?
So my undergrad I had done. My undergrad I had done back in New York.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right? Of course, you did say that. Yes,
and,
of course.
My graduate school in California was expensive. It was actually, I wouldn't say it was actually relatively cheap. Comparison to most states, it was actually pretty cheap. I think I spent probably like 20 grand tops for a master's degree, which is like nothing.
That's cheap, yeah.
The other thing is, though, I would say is that I actually I wasn't living on campus as well, and I was just working during the day, so that also helped. And the thing is, too, that money, getting that education money, because they would give me like $5,000 or whatever when I would get the financial aid, and some of it was like leftover. Supposedly, it was supposed to be using it for books and stuff. Yeah. But I was using some of that money to like, I had this car that I was fixing, right? So like I used to have, and me and Salve joke about this all the time because we had the same type of car. I had a Volvo 780. From like I think it was a 1991 or 92. Yeah. And the car was built like a tank, man. It was a great car like the first 2 years, but the second 2 years I had it started having all kinds of problems. And it seemed like every 6 months or so, something would break, and every time would cost me like $1,000 to get it fixed. Yeah. Oh. Right. So I had to maintain $1,000 in savings at all time, just in case something happened with the car. Yeah. And I had to, fix the car, or I had to put the car on my, I had to pay it off on my credit card. So I was building up debt while I was doing this. And eventually I just bought a new car because I was looking at the amount of money it was costing me. Well, then plus, like I said, I was in this software sales job. I was starting to make like my first real money in my life. Yeah. And I was like, well, and that was the thing too. So that's what kept me. And then after I worked there, I worked for IBM. And then I worked for my current employer, which is another big telecom company currently in the US here. Yeah. And I, built a whole career from that. And now, a pretty successful career in sales, and, life's pretty comfortable. But yeah, it was a big fight to kind of get through that journey of, going through that process, that learning curve of,
and the timing of it
doing those different things.
Yeah. And the timing of it, I think it probably instilled a certain amount of tenacity in you, because, people have to remember, that the recession at that time, pre-2010 was pretty intense, pretty much. There was no one of any working age who had ever experienced anything like that. So I would imagine it was pretty scary. So I can imagine that you came out of that literally a stronger person with more resolve and more focus in what you wanted to do with your life. You kind of were forced to be that. Do or die, I would say. Yeah,
it was pretty much do or die with every job. Yeah. And because it was like, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to end up on the street. Yeah. Right. Or I'm going to end up, I probably would have just ended up going home or spending a little more time with my brother if it got that bad. But I did not want to get to that situation, right? So, I worked really hard. I did everything I had to do because, every day during that time was like make or break, right? Yeah. And, the economy was not good. That was part of the reason why I ended up working on, with some dude out of his condominium, right? And there were a bunch of other places I interviewed at, which, or I had, I remember I had this one job for like 2 weeks, which was like the most ridiculous job ever. So this was like the business that my brother had run had just failed. It's like late 2008. It's like the summer, I think, of 2008. Like everything's imploding, and I didn't have a car. I didn't even have a car. I didn't even, at that time, I didn't even have a car. And I rode my bike to this place. I had to ride my bike like 3 or 4 miles to this location and to this office building. And I get there, and when I go into the office building, I wear a suit too. So I had to roll up the pant legs and everything, because I was like, okay, this is an interview, right? This is for a sales job, whatever. So I get there, I get into the interview, nobody else has a suit on. I was like, what the hell's going on here, right? And were they like t-shirts and designer jeans, or were they? No, these guys some of these guys look like they had just got done smoking crack. Right? Like these guys were like, some of these guys look
now's
like
the drug
people,
dealer job. Okay.
They're like, these guys are just looking rough. And I'm like, what is going on here, right? And
what kind of business was it? What kind of business was it?
So I get it'll come out in the story. So I get in. I come in, so this guy comes in, he just got his jeans and a polo on, right? And he's at a desk, and he's like, I hand him my resume. He doesn't even look at my resume. He just throws it down the table. He's like, listen, this is a call center job. The calls come in because they're doing refinances for old people or whatever, right? Okay. He's like, there's an automated dialer. It just automatic dials these people. You talk to them, you get them to buy, you get them interested, and then you press this button to transfer them to somebody else. That's all you do, right? And for each person, we pay you $7 or $8 an hour, right? I think it was like $8 an hour. We pay you $8 an hour, and then for every person that you transfer, you get a $5 bonus, right?
Okay.
So I was like, all right. So he's like, don't wear that shit when you come back tomorrow. He literally said, don't wear that shit when you come back tomorrow. He's like, come in. He's like, we got 2 shifts. We got night shift. We got morning shift. I want you to come here in the morning shift. Come in at this time. So I come in, and, this place is like, so I'm with all these other people. We're in a room. Auto dialer comes in, start working this job. Most of the time, the auto dialer was broke. There were a couple of times we came in, and the guy was like, go home. The auto dialer's broke. There's some problem, right? Because they had just set up the company. And with the auto dialer was based in was based in like Jamaica or something like that, right? And then it's like somewhere in the islands, right? So it's already like even more sketch. And then I remember so then I went to work for this guy for a week, and so then at one point, there's this vice president, the second in charge guy who's running this, right? And he comes in, he's like, hey, come in my office. Because I was like right across from him. I come in the office, and he's like, hey, he's like, I heard you on the phone. He's like, you sound really good. You sound like you're educated. You sound like you know what you're doing. I want to give you a promotion. Why don't you show up in Newport Beach tomorrow at this other place? We're going to promote you to work the actual loans, right? Okay. And I was like, yeah. I was like, awesome. I was like, I said, the only problem is I can't go to Newport Beach. He's like, well, why can't you go to Newport Beach? I was like, well, it takes too long for me to get there with that time on the buses, right? Like I can't take it. He's like, you don't have a car, right? And I was like, no, I don't have a car. And he was like, do you have a He was like, do you have a license? At this point, I didn't have a driver's license because I had come from Buffalo. I relied most of my life on like public transportation.
Okay, yeah.
And he was like, what the F? He was like, what the F do you not have a license? And he like picks up, he just like goes nuts. He starts having like a meltdown. He throws a stapler across the room and he's like, dude, like, what's wrong with you? You don't have a job. You know, you get the fuck out of my office. Get the fuck out. Just get the fuck out of my office, right? And
what kind of reaction is that? Was he Jamaican too?
Yeah, I was in complete shock because I was like, I had gone from getting a promotion to almost
all
being
of a sudden,
fired.
Yeah.
In the span of like maybe not even a minute, like you know. And the other guy comes down. The guy who runs the place, and he's like, dude, what's going on? And this other guy's like swearing, he's like, going nuts. He's like, he doesn't have a car. You play this? This guy doesn't have a car. Listen, Southern California, he doesn't have a fucking car. And the guy's like, dude, just calm down. He's like, just go. And he told me, he's like, dude, don't pay attention to that guy. He's an asshole. Just go back to your desk and go back to work, right?
Yeah.
And so I went back to work. So it comes at the end of the week, right? And this is all like 1 week. I show up to get my paycheck, and it was like something out of like the 1850s or something where you show up, and you put your X to get paid, right? So like you show up, they have this book. I sign my name to get paid, and this guy's like, well, you know what? The corporate checks didn't go through, so I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you in personal check, and then I'm going to pay you in some cash that I have on hand, right? So he gives me a personal check for half of it, and the rest he counts out in cash and quarters, right? And I like look at this, and I was like, I ran to them. I was like, oh my God, like this is a mess. So I went over, I cashed my check right away. The check cashed, thankfully.
Okay.
And then I went home that night and started applying for more jobs.
Yeah, you got to get the heck out of there. That place was like ready for a federal investigation.
Yeah, I literally never went back. And he just called. I remember like 2 weeks went by, and he called me up, and he was like, hey, are you still working with us or whatever? And I was like, I found another opportunity. And he was like, okay, I understand. And that was it.
That's just crazy.
Like, it was nuts.
So I would imagine that things are a little bit more stable for you now working in telecommunications.
Oh, yeah, they're like 100 million times more stable for me now.
So, you work in sales now in telecommunications, correct?
Yeah, I still work in sales. So I work in enterprise sales. I work with two big well, I used to work with two, but now I have a bunch of other new clients that just recently gave me. But so I have like 9 accounts, large enterprise accounts that I work with.
Have you noticed? Have you noticed any change in the workflow now with what many people are saying is going to develop into a real depression? Have you noticed any changes?
Yeah. So, yeah, I have. And it's very unfortunate. So the thing is, I think I'm lucky for the moment. One of my biggest customers is a large government contractor. And then we're getting a lot. So they have just even more work from the government than they normally do. And then the other thing is we have...
So there's actually at least one positive result from...
Yeah, so there's one positive, and then a lot of companies are transitioning their workforces from working in office spaces to working at home. So
which is another opportunity for you.
Yeah, which is another opportunity for us. But we do have a lot of customers that are getting crushed by it, right? I have one company that's a major shipping company, and they're like, yeah, our container ships are going back and forth empty between us, between the U.S. and China.
That's terrible.
So we're not making money right now. So yeah, it's a mess. So a lot of, and I'm lucky. I have another colleague. She has like one of her big customers. They sell like tickets to sporting events. So obviously there's no sporting events. One of her other customers was like a big golf course. Obviously there's no golf being played. So right. So she's not going to make her quota, right? Like, so she's just going to get crushed.
So you as a salesperson in telecommunications, do you get into any of the analytical work? I mean, are you out there sniffing out the market, seeing what is going up and what is going down? Because I'm thinking about this trade situation between the U.S. and China. Do you have any knowledge about that? Trying to gain any foresight when it comes to sales?
So you try to gain foresight, you try to learn, but you kind of have, in this particular role, your deck of accounts is your deck of accounts, right? So, if your customer is that ticket sales operator, that's your customer, right? And you can't switch. And because management decides which accounts you get and which team you're on, right?
Okay.
That's not a decision that you get to make.
So they're kind of handing the assignment to you, and you just run with it. You're not into any of the analysis. So okay.
So you have to do your own analysis, because you have to look at your accounts and you're saying, of the accounts I have, who's buying, who's not, right? So you're doing some of that, but you can't. But I'm saying, if you get all bad cards, if you get all bad accounts, you can do as much analysis as you want. You're not going to be able to sell anything, right?
But you're a salaried employee, correct? With bonuses, I would assume. But
so in sales we have your base pay, and the base pay here is really nice, and then you get commission, which is you get compensated on top of what you do, and then we have a yearly or quarterly bonuses as well. There's also different spiffs. So the company they incentivize you to try to sell some things over others, so you get money for that.
Okay.
So, sales is the thing with sales is and I would tell young people today, if you're interested in making money or interested in having a good life, and you're okay with people rejecting you, then it's the biggest thing, because I think a lot of people who get into sales, that's one of the very first things that you have to get used to, is people telling you no all the time or rejecting you, right? And you kind of have to build up your wall to that and just get okay, whatever, and move on to the next person.
I would imagine it's a safe assumption to make that you get a lot more no than yes when you're first starting out.
Yeah. And it just you get, even as a regular sales guy, you get a lot of no on a constant basis, because of the fact that it's just more than likely. You're asking people for money, so unless they're interested, and you have to make a pitch, you have to show them value in the solutions that you're selling to their particular, even to get them to talk to you, because a lot of times the people you're trying to talk to are busy themselves. The last thing they want to do is talk to a sales rep.
Yeah.
Right. So, in that respect, it's an unforgiving job, but every job, in my experience, every job has its downside.
Sure.
That's just a particular downside with sales. But the good thing about sales is they pay you well, right? And the reason they pay you well is because not many people can take that much rejection,
right?
And be okay.
Well, again, we can go back to your beginnings there in California with all the struggles that you had to go through, and it kind of turned your life upside down, and you had to build up from scratch. That right there has given you that suit of armor, so to speak, to go in and do this battle as a salesperson. Yeah. And I think the other thing is, too, you realize after a while, no is actually not a bad answer. If somebody tells you, well, first of all, no is the beginning of negotiations. Well, no is a challenge, and we like challenges.
No is just the beginning of the process. Yeah. No, very rarely, it happens, but very rarely somebody's going to say yes, right, at the very beginning of that conversation, because most of the time they haven't heard the value yet. They don't know. You have to try to convince them. It's a journey process that you have to go along before you can get to that yes answer. So, it's you have to show value. They have to be in the right circle, because sometimes they're just in the wrong circumstance. It's just not a good thing for me right now, right? So you have to learn all of those scenarios. And the other thing is, at least you know where they stand. The worst, as a sales guy, the worst thing is the person that's hims and haws. Well, yeah, maybe let's talk about it. Okay. Those guys, the guys who can never make up their mind, are actually the worst, because
you have to put a lot of time into that.
You put a lot of time into them. So we call them time pirates, right? So what happens is you end up investing a lot of time with them. So the guy who tells you to go screw off on the phone is one of the best people ever, because you had a 30-second conversation with him. He won't remember you in 3 months. He's not remembering you tonight. Like I said, just don't take it personal, whatever. Right. He told you I'm not interested, right? That's a second, in sales, it's the second best answer you can hear, is I'm not interested, right? The worst answer is, let me think about it. Let's have 5 conversations. Let me involve all these other people. You spend 6 months on it. And then they're like, well, we still don't know. Or let's talk about it next year. Yeah. Right. So they can never come to a conclusion
after using all that time. Yeah. So how much working from home have you had to do now?
I've been working from a lot of salespeople work from home currently. So I've been working from home for basically the last 2 years. Oh, really? Okay. So this didn't really. So for me, it didn't affect me that much in regards to working from home. Yeah. Yeah.
And you've got your health. You haven't been sick.
No. Good. Thankfully, I have my health. I've been quarantining during this whole crazy scenario.
Business as usual. I mean, business as usual for you then.
I wouldn't say business as usual because because the thing is, I normally try to get out of the house at the end of the day. I go to the gym and work out. Go for the run. On the weekends you go out, you do stuff, especially here in California, right? There's so many things to do. Yeah. You meet up with friends, but now, there's none of that.
What kind of working out do you do?
So I actually like to lift weights. I'm not a power lifter in any sense. But I do like the bench press. I use dumbbells. I use, all kinds of extra, the equipment there. I wouldn't say that I'm definitely not a bodybuilder, but I have a lot more respect for that craft now that I know what goes into it and the kind of dedication that it takes, especially the people who are natural, right? Who are naturally into that, right? Yeah. Because I think before, when I was younger, and because, so I guess on a side note, on a personal level, at one point, obviously I was dating or whatever, and now I'm happily married, but before I was dating and I was like, well, I'm having problems dating and stuff. And I was like, well, and I just kind of I was pretty stupid. I was like, why isn't this working for me? I was like, I'm a pretty good, smart guy. I read a lot, right? So I was like, why don't I get a book on dating? And I read a book on dating, and, some of it just lays it out. So it's like, hey, well, if you want to get somebody that's good looking, you probably need to be attractive yourself. So you probably need to be working out or in good shape. So I was like, oh, that seems simple enough. And then I was like, well, this seems like something I could do, right? And so I had a gym membership with one of my jobs, and I just started going to the gym. And they start you off with a trainer, and the guy's like, well, what is your goal? And I was like, well, I want to kind of look like a boxer. Like, how would I train to kind of look like a boxer? And he was like, and this guy was a former Army Ranger guy or something like that. Okay. He's like, oh, this is great, blah, 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 right? And he's told me what I had to do. And then, I started working at it, and I started going and the other thing is, at that point too, I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have a lot was going on with me. And I think that the thing is, I guess a lot of people go to the gym, I guess, for camaraderie. They want to talk to other people. Yeah. But I like to kind of just go to the gym and decompress and think about things. I can identify with that. That's my therapy time, so to speak. That's where I can unwind. Yeah. That's where I can get more into my own inner. Yeah, that's my time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because the other thing is too, I think sometimes at work I get frustrated, or there's something I feel it. Anxiety or nervousness or pressure, and it's a good time, I don't know, by lifting weights or I feel like I get a lot of that out of me, right? Or doing that type of pull-ups or exercise or dips or whatever. I feel like I kind of get something out, and I feel a lot better about myself. And I know there's all kinds of clinical studies and everything that show you get a lot of that out of it. And and I think it did help me with dating and stuff. And then
you get a certain amount of self-confidence. The better shape you're in, the better you feel about yourself, and then you present yourself in a totally different way in social situations.
Yeah. And people look at you different, right? So
sure they do. Absolutely.
Yes. So I think, I was so it was just this wonderful thing. I wish I had found it earlier in my life. I just wasn't that type of person. Right. And no one really directed me to that. I think also Southern California is a very visual place, right?
Yes,
we have Venice Beach, we have all this, bodybuilding's big out here, right? And when I was in Buffalo, I was a kid, I just wasn't looking for that. I didn't see those people.
Yeah, it's a totally different environment for those kind of things.
It's a totally different environment. But here, you see those people, and I have because I know what it takes to do that. Those guys, they're going to the gym 2 times a day, 10 days a week to look like that, right? They even in the guys who use steroids, you still have to put
There's still a lot of work that's put into it. Yeah.
You have to do to diet. You have to have a very specific diet, right? You just don't.
There's a lot of discipline that is demanded in order to get there. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the thing is what is a lot of people, I think the perception of a lot of people is that you're just born that way, right? Like you were born that way, and genetics plays a part.
But nothing beats nothing tops hard work. It's the hard work that brings about. You can have all the genetics in the world, but if you don't do anything with it, then where are you? You haven't achieved anything.
Yeah, and you could be a guy with horrible genetics, but if you go in there every day, you're gonna, everyone's given. The thing is, just everyone's given something on a genetics level,
and you can always build on it. You can always build on it. Yeah. I was lucky at an early age. I think I was 7 years old when I started playing baseball. I was 6 years old when I started playing baseball, and then 7 when I started with football. And, of course, basketball and track and all that stuff came afterwards. But I was focused on football from the age of 7, 8. All the way through high school. I went to college on a football scholarship. And then taking that athletic ability and that discipline that I learned through all those years, now I apply it to powerlifting. So I'm lucky. I've just had an athletic life my entire life, and I feel what it's done for me, and I can apply that to my life. There's more to be. I mean, of course, you can just be a meathead and be big and strong, and that's your thing. But I like to take that discipline that I've picked up through the years and apply it, of course, to my training as a powerlifter, but also apply it to my life outside of powerlifting. I mean, those lessons of discipline can be applied if you have a mindset to apply it. Yeah.
Well, I think too, to me, it's like some of that mindset or some of those ideas are applicable to other parts of your life. Right, like that kind of discipline or the ability to keep going. Yeah. Right, and that ability that planning,
setting goals,
the ability to craft your life. Right, I think is because many people feel like there's an ideology that many people are just like and I guess this gets back to. I mean, obviously, I studied in school. With communism and stuff like that. Like you're just like. There's a belief, or many people have the belief that you are kind of a victim of your circumstances, right? Like whatever your circumstances are, those are your circumstances and they're immutable, right? Like you can't change that. That's just how the world is, right? And I think that like powerlifting or bodybuilding, working out of the gym, like those are kinds of things that show you that like, you're right, with enough planning, preparation, and discipline, you can actually change where you are. Exactly. You can make a difference in your own life. Yeah. And I think, but we have a lot of people today that are like, and I get it. It's hard, man. I'm not going to say it is.
Yeah, there are circumstances that can make it harder. Yeah, there's circumstances that can make it harder for one demographic than it is for another. But you still have that thing called drive. You still have that thing called focus. You still have that thing called discipline, and those things can be applied to kind of batter up, bat against those walls of limitation.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I think everyone, because we talk in today's society, we talk a lot about privileges, like, this person's privileged and this person's privileged. And I think there are definitely privileged people without a doubt. But I think the thing is but it also sets up in some people's minds this idea that, okay, well, I'm in one of these groups, I don't have any privileges, right? Which I think is the wrong, because then they're like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm not privileged, whatever. No. Right. But I think it sets up, because the way that I look at it is, in life, everyone gets a hand of cards that are dealt to them, right? And some of those cards you can trade in, some of those cards you're stuck with, right? But it's like, how do you take the best advantage of the cards that you have? So, maybe you're in a disadvantaged group, right? But maybe you're good looking, right? That's a privilege that you have. How can you use, like for me personally, all right, like, growing up, I had a learning disability. I had dyslexia, so I struggled with school, but I was really good at history. Right. So, and for whatever reason, I was just gifted at that. Right. So how can I use this to get myself to the next level? Right. Like if you look at the advantages that you have, the things that you're good at, if you're good at art or whatever it is, like, how do you use that advantage that you have, right, to fuel yourself to try to get to that next level? Like, okay, some things you don't even think of as an advantage. Like, I can hear no, I can get rejected a lot and be okay, right? you wouldn't think of that as an advantage, but that's an advantage. So what kind of career or what can I do given the cards that I have to like move forward or to create a better life for myself, right? Like I'm good at this. What else could I do? Right. So I think people don't necessarily have that mindset. They have the mindset of I'm in a disadvantaged group or these other people are privileged. This is it. Right.
Yeah. Of course. I believe that there is such a thing as privilege. You know, there's male privilege. There's white privilege. I believe also there's a thing called. I also believe in white woman privilege. That's a whole other podcast. Okay. And then I believe that there's a certain demographic of minorities, among them women, people of color who have disadvantages. But I'm also a believer that you can shape your own life. Of course, it's difficult. Of course, no matter how hard you try, you may not make it. But there's this thing. It's, you know, if you have generational disadvantage, if it's not just you who is at a disadvantage, but if your parents, your grandparents, and your great grandparents have been in that disadvantage, and that's kind of what your family is used to, I can totally understand that an inner city black family that has grown up in the projects, and their parents were in the projects, their grandparents were in the projects, and that's all they've ever seen. That's basically how they've been taught to live. I get it. That you know, the cards are stacked against those children who are the products of that generational disadvantage. What blows my mind, what saddens me, and I tell you, it's kind of rough to see some of these things as an expat. What saddens me and just breaks my heart is to see that there is a lot of people in charge of running our country who refuse to acknowledge that there is such a thing as this generational disadvantage. They refuse to acknowledge that it exists, and they definitely aren't doing anything to fix it.
Well, so I think the thing is with and I guess, and I definitely believe. I mean, so let me say this. I think as a person who, because obviously I'm a white person, so I think if people see me as white, right? Like technically I'm a quarter African American, but people don't know that about me. So that's the funny thing is, so I didn't find that out about myself. I knew we always had some black in us. I didn't know how much, right? But I don't consider myself black because I know when I show up in a room, no one sees me as black, right? So I don't live that experience, right? For better or worse, right? And so I don't carry that with me, but I think as understanding it as, I guess, a quote unquote white person, whatever that is, because I mean, race is a very complex subject, right? And I think to a certain extent, it's on a certain level, it's real, but it's also not real, which if you get what I'm saying. Like, in some sense, it's totally made up, right? Like that's how, you know, we stand back and you see the Hutus and the Tutsis like killing each other, right? And you're like, I don't understand the difference. But they understand the difference, right? Just like you see in Northern Ireland, right? The Irish are going at each other, and you're like, I don't get it. You guys both seem like you're Irish to me, but for them, they really understand the differences of what that struggle is, right? Because we're obviously outside of it. So there's race on that level. I think on the generational level, and it gets into a lot of topics, because I think on one hand, I totally understand from a historical perspective, like what's going on with African Americans, and obviously, like it, you know, they had slavery, you had Jim Crow, you had, it wasn't really until the 1960s, and actually really maybe in the 1970s, that things started to equalize, right, in the country, and they're still not equal to this day. Like, you know, unfortunately, the gentleman who got shot for just jogging like last week, right? Because people thought, you know, this guy must be running from some kind of crime. He couldn't just be running that neighborhood, right? Right. And I think, you know, the on the one hand is, I think for white America, there's a sense of like guilt or like personal. So the thing is, I think a lot of white people are saying, well, if I accept that there's this generational thing, then I'm saying that I'm guilty or my grandparents are guilty.
See, and that is something.
I don't think that's something. I don't think that's something that's true. you can, and I think as a white person, what I try to say to those people is you could recognize something is true without it being associated with you and your guilt. Right?
Exactly, because a lot of people, there's a lot of white people out there, it's impossible to talk about these kind of things with them because they automatically get defensive. And I believe that is an almost automatic reaction with a lot of white Americans, that they feel guilty. And I wish they would stop that. If you're racist, if you have racist attitudes or discriminatory attitudes, then feel guilty because you should be. But if you don't, then I think those are the people who could be the best. Well, white people could be the ones who make the change. I don't think black people alone are going to be able to change that situation in America. It's going to take the gathering and activating of white allies who acknowledge that there is a problem and then use the positions of influence that they have. And there is influence just in using your voice. You don't have to be a rich, powerful politician or a businessman or woman. You can just be that white person in the street who is vocalizing the realities of the situations of race in America. And become an ally by. I think to me, the way that I see it is the way that I see it is that black people are Americans, right? And that we should treat all Americans equal. Exactly. And I think it shouldn't be this us and them thing. It shouldn't be.
Yeah. So we should see one of the.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
One of the things that I see constantly, which and I think maybe because I'm a historian by training, but it annoys the shit out of me, is you see white supremacists or other white groups, and they're like, well, black people are American. Now I'm like, and to me, I'm like, excuse me, they're probably the most Americans there are because they've been here since
the beginning,
they've been here since the 1600s, right?
Exactly.
And B, they didn't sign up to be Americans; they were kidnapped to be Americans, right? So you can't just. They were here during all the Revolutionary battles, Bunker Hill, Yorktown, all that shit. They were here. They fought. They were in the Civil War. They were in World War II. Like, how could you say? I'm sorry, I'm getting a little loud, but how can you say that they're not Americans? To me, it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, and the thing is, most white people in America are not tracing their roots back to the Mayflower. Their relatives didn't show up here until they came here in the early 20th century because they were Italian and German or Polish. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But you can't then stand back and try to be a white supremacist and rewrite history
irony.
And say like, oh, African Americans aren't real Americans. So what are you talking about, bro? They're like more Americans than you and you're Polish. If you were going to, draw it up that way.
See, right, and with your background in history, with your education in history, with your confidence in your, in relating the facts, you could be and probably are a great ally for Black Americans when it comes to these issues of racism and discrimination. You're the kind of ally that we need. You're not afraid to talk about it, and that discussion right there will lead to change if we get enough people that are willing to talk about it. But like I say, most people run for the hills when you bring up the issue of race relations. They don't even want to talk about it.
There's race relation. The other thing is, though, I will say on the other side, especially because the thing is with the reparations thing, because people are bringing up reparations again, right? Because I think that is kind of like, well, because they're like, okay, well, because that one, I think I understand. I'm trying to explain this the most diplomatic way. I'm trying to think of how to say this, like, because African Americans are like, we need to get paid reparations, right? And I think I do have some issues with reparations, because I don't think a lot of people think about how complex it is, right? Because on the one hand, let's just take a person like myself, right? So I probably had, and I'm sure I had people in my family that were racist, right? White people in my family that were racist. And I've had people in my family that were probably maybe somehow involved with the slave trade, right? I don't know. I can't, if I did enough homework, I'm probably sure I had some relatives that did bad things. Everyone does, right? Yeah. But I also have a quarter African American, right? Now, should I get 25% of a check? Right.
Well, but do you think the only way to do you think the only way to pay reparations is through a monetary handout? Now, there's a question for you, because
I oppose a monetary handout, giving people checks, but I, of course, I've talked to and I've seen people say that that's the way we should do it. What I think is we should just, and I think this is just something in general, we should just fund more black colleges. We should give more money to those areas that need money, not because of reparations, but just because that's the right thing to do. If we have a ton of Americans who are living in absolute poverty, who have no chance to move up the social system, then it's not good for us as an economy. Look, it's the thing is, like, do you really, I mean, right now, if you think about it, if you think through it logically, right, many white people are afraid of black people because they're afraid that they might hurt them or kill them or whatever, because they're coming from a desperate economic situation, right? If African Americans weren't coming from a desperate economic situation, they wouldn't be engaged in that type of activity. Maybe I just think about it too simplistically, but
I guess I think that's a little simplistic. I think that's a little simplistic, because what would you say then about the white people who are in a difficult economic situation? Why don't rich white people fear other white people who are in it? Yeah, exactly. Why is that? Why is the perception different? They may fear them. Maybe they fear them, but it's a different level of fear.
Well, I guess one is I was talking to the perception, right? Not necessarily the reality when I brought up that example. That is the perception, right? Yeah. It's not the reality, because the reality is more than likely, as a white person, I'm going to get killed by another white person.
Yeah, right? Statistics say that's what will happen.
Statistics say you're going to get killed by some, and the same thing with African Americans.
Same thing, yeah.
African Americans get killed disproportionately by African Americans, not white people, right?
Exactly.
It's just that when those color lines are passed, both sides react more. It's just more of a news thing, right? Because of the way that we are, unfortunately, the history that we have. So
I think the whole issue of reparations would be a non-issue if, as you said, if they just do the right thing. Just do what's right.
Yeah, do what's right.
There's a famous quote. There's a famous quote from James Brown. May he rest in peace. James Brown said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of, "You don't have to do anything for me. Just open the door and let me do it myself."
Yeah.
And I think if that were the reality of the situation in America today, there wouldn't be any talk about reparations, because things would be equal.
Yeah, things would be equal, right?
Yeah.
If they weren't, I mean, if those cities, those inner cities didn't look like the way they were, and those communities didn't look the way they were, you wouldn't have anybody saying you need to send me a monetary check, or somebody online posting like white people need to give up their property or give 3/3 of their white wealth to us, right? You wouldn't have people saying things like that. I mean, you probably would. You'd still have the fringes. You're always going to have people on the far ends, right? But the majority of people would just be like, or even African Americans, and some people did say, like, dude, that's crazy. You can't do it like that. That's just not right, right? So, I don't have less of those crazies, I would say, if people are given a chance, right?
I'm against a check. Although if someone cut me a check, I'll take it. But I'm against that as a form of reparations. I would rather see, in reality, not just talking about a level playing field. I want to see a level playing field. I want to see inner city schools funded the way they're supposed to be, and I would like to see some sort of educational effort, because this thing, when they talk about black people, they only talk about black people in the inner city. There's more. There's another reality for black people. Not everyone.
Well, I think that's. I mean, I was going to bring this up earlier. That's the other thing is, like, we look a lot. Obviously this conversation is done in broad strokes, right? In terms of, and I think people kind of forget the individual level, because
they do.
Because, like, let's take Jaden Smith, right? Will Smith's son, right? Jaden Smith is super privileged. Like, he's a multimillionaire. Like, Jaden Smith is, I mean, he's still African American. There's still some situations that he's going to have to deal with in regards to that. But Jaden Smith is going to have a way better life than your average poor white person born in West Virginia.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think sometimes other white people get upset because, and I've had this happen to me, right? You walk into a situation as a white person, and again, it's the pluses and advantages of life, right?
Sure.
And because you're white, people just automatically assume that I grew up in the suburbs, that I come from this wealthy background and everything I have in life has been given to me, right? And I see or I understand why a lot of white people get upset about that, because they're like, well, you know, I had to work for some of the things I had to. Now, there's obviously white people out there who didn't work for anything, who got a golden check cut for them, right? It happens. It happens disproportionately to white people, right? Because of our history and who we are as a society. But I think we need to, and again, I go back to what Martin Luther King said, and that's what I was taught when I was a boy, is what we should be working towards, which I think we, as a society in general, I think all people have kind of lost sight of. It's like we're working for a society where skin color and race doesn't matter anymore, where people just see people as people.
Yep.
And I think we do have to understand that there's history there, and we do have to understand like that there are systems of that were set up a long time ago that breed inequalities, but at the same time we don't want to take our eye off the prize of where we want to go. I mean, the same thing with like, that's why to me, like people like Nelson Mandela, like all the horrible things that happened to Nelson Mandela, you would think like Nelson Mandela would be one of the like most racist people ever, but he wasn't. He was like, and it's really sad to see like what's happened to South Africa, in that Nelson Mandela wanted the white people to stay. He saw them as fellow South Africans, right? And that he wanted to build this rainbow society, right? Like he wanted to build this super like, now it seems it's so far past what he wanted to create, right? But I think many people forget that. I think there are people still in South Africa, that still want to create that society.
I have a friend from South Africa. I'm going to try and get him on this podcast. He's a white guy, and I would love to hear his take on the current situation in South Africa. There's a big movement to get white people off of land. To me, it's a terrifying situation. I don't know how you can be white and dare to live in South Africa. So I want to get this guy's opinion and in his view and his experiences on what's happening down there. But it's an interesting situation. But one thing I just want to go back to the whole thing about white privilege and people's perception of white privilege in America. You mentioned Jaden Smith. And how successful he is. He's filthy rich, multimillionaire, to be so young. And you could say he's made it. Yes, he has made it. But we can't erase the fact that Jaden Smith, regardless of how successful he is still going to get hit in the face from time to time with racism.
Yeah, like I said, he's still going to have to deal with that from time to time.
I remember there was a bit that Chris Rock did on one of his specials where he was talking about he lives in some fancy neighborhood outside of New York City. I can't remember where. It was someplace on Long Island or something like that. And he said there's 4 black people that live in that neighborhood, wealthiest area of the New York City area. He said there's he's there, supposedly one of the top top comics ever. There's Mary J. Blige, who lives in that neighborhood, one of the top female R&B vocalists and musicians. There is Shaquille O'Neal, maybe one of the best basketball players. So he's like, you can live there as a black person, but you've got to be the best at what you do in order to live there. He says, and then he says, who my neighbor is? He's a white guy and he's a dentist. He didn't invent teeth. He's not the best dentist in the world, but he's able to have the generational wealth to live in that neighborhood. But the black people who live there, there's no generational wealth, and they have to be the best at what they do. I think that it's a funny bit. It's a lot. He said it a lot funnier than what I did, but it's a funny bit. But it also has so much realism in it. It puts a light on what white privilege is, and how you can't look and say, well, here's a black man or woman who has made it, and here's a white man or woman who has made it. They're equal. Their experiences are equal. Their experiences are very seldom equal because of the racial undertones that are in our society. It's a sad thing. It's a sad thing, but it's a real situation, and I think people, you and I are having a discussion about it, and I wish there was more discussion about it instead of finger pointing.
Yeah, and I think that it goes to, I think that's what people don't understand about the generational, because there's a difference between wealth and being rich. I think he even talked about this himself, right?
Yes, he did.
So, like, obviously the basketball player, Shaquille O'Neal, is rich. Jaden Smith is rich because they, like, it's all, I don't want to say they hit the lotto, but, and because they obviously did a lot of hard work to be where they had to be, right? But like he said, they're all exceptional people, right? Which got them to that position in life. The dentist isn't exceptional. I mean, he still has his skill set and everything.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And
he did the work. He got his education.
He did the work
Built
that was
practice,
required to get that.
Built his practice, yeah.
So it's not like somebody just gave him something, but he did start off with more in life, more than likely, right? And it could be the case he didn't, but more than likely he probably did, right? And that generational wealth is passed down, because if you look at, most millionaires in the United States are not people who are basketball players or anything like that, right? Most millionaires are people who work in upper corporate America, right? And of course, being in corporate America, I can tell you, the jobs that I've had, there are they're there, but there are very few African Americans that are there.
You see it,
right? Yeah. You see them, but they're far and few between, right? Because of the fact that, and there's some white women that are on there, right? But in terms of minorities, like, they're there, but there's like a sprinkling of them. Yeah. The vast majority are all, even myself, like as a younger white guy, even myself in corporate America, I'm a minority to a certain extent, because most of them are white guys and their 40s and 50s, and that's like the predominant, like, what it is, right? Yeah. And on my team, it's mostly, like, for my sales team, it's mostly white guys, and it's not anything against them. I'm not saying, because I know people are already in the comments type of way, I'm not saying they did anything wrong to be where they are in life. I'm just saying that the way that the United States was developed, and we have to accept the fact that, like, we had slavery in this country for over 200 years, and then after that we had, there was an attempt, there was an honest, and I think that's the other thing, is that people don't, or a lot of, I think African Americans, they talk about it sometimes, but many African Americans don't talk about, there were a lot of white people who tried to change the system. They failed, right?
Well, the first years after the Civil War, there was an explosion of black influence in politics all over the country, North and South.
There was Reconstruction.
Exactly.
Which did not work out. Yeah.
It's just that it didn't work out. There were these fellas in white robes and hoods.
Ku Klux Klan.
Who started.
There were a bunch of terrorist organizations, and the South basically went into terrorist mode. And these people, because they did not want the social system upset, and then basically that fighting went on for 10 years. I mean, because it's something that we don't really talk about in American history, but you basically had a rebellion, a minor terrorist kind of war that was going on in the South.
And it was about 10, 15 years of pretty intense.
Yeah, tense. And the federal government was trying to hold it down.
Yeah.
And, they just were like, it was kind of like Vietnam. They were just like, we were just tired of doing this.
And again, for the listeners, this is after the Civil War. People think that these kind of things was just related to the Civil War. This is after the Civil War, once Reconstruction was up and going, and then came the protests from the diehard Confederates.
Was it because because that was the whole, I don't want to bring up the whole Civil War, but that's another thing that upsets me. Like, the Civil War was not fought for states. I'm sure somebody's going to say, oh, states' rights. The state rights, there was an element of state rights, but the state right was to own other people. That was the state right that they were worried about, that they all wrote into the new constitutions, right, into the Confederate Constitution, which you can go read online. Like, one of the first paragraphs is, we should be able to own people. Right. Bottom line.
So states' rights, and again, states' rights. Yes, it had to do with states' rights, but the right to own slaves,
own people. Yeah, that was the major one, because they wanted. And the thing is too, I think people don't realize, because the other thing is, people are saying, well, that's true, Jeff, but most people didn't own slaves, and that is 100% true.
But most people,
white people in the South, did not own slaves.
True, but
most the fear wasn't not. But if just, I think my point is, the fear is not that. Not that the slaves would. So the fear was, if you read the Southern secession documents, that slaves would become free. If slaves become free, that means that they can marry who they want. if they can marry white women, then they're going to have an amalgamation of the races, right? That was what they always ended with, and especially in their speeches, an amalgamation of the races, right? Even if I forget his name offhand, but the vice president of the Confederacy, Jeff Davis's vice president, Alexander Stevens.
Stevens, yeah.
Yeah, he point blank about it. He was like, this is to maintain the white race being in charge, and if we don't do this fight, black people are going to come, they're going to take over, and we're going to be a mongoloid race, and it's going to be the end of the world.
So if people would just take half a minute and educate themselves, all of this stuff is there. Stephen's speeches on that very subject. I mean, you can look it up. It's all right there. You can read it in these documents. From the different state constitutions and from the Confederate Constitution and what they stood for. It's all right there. But what is this thing that we're living through today, where people refuse it's not even new knowledge, when people refuse to become aware of the knowledge that's out there? I think some people are just afraid to admit that they're wrong. Is it that simple?
Well, I think it's not that. Well, I think there's partly it's to admit that they're wrong, but the other part is they don't feel guilty. Right, because they feel like they got because the thing is, and I understand this. I was born in the North, right? So obviously, my side one, we were John Brown and the rest of the crazies who were going down there to start. That was the other thing, is John Brown basically kicked off the whole Civil War to a certain extent, which nobody talks about. John Brown was like, God came to him and was like, you need to free the African Americans. He took him and his son, took guns down to the South, and was like, okay, we're going to need to arm you for a rebellion. And that's because then the South was like, oh, well, they're going to try to free black people. These Northerners are crazy. We need to start arming up, right? Yeah. But beyond that, I think the thing is, in the South, they take a lot of pride in their heritage. And I think when you're born into that, I think it's hard, because everything you're being told since the time you were a little boy is, these are our heroes. This is what we fought for. Blah blah blah. Right?
Yeah.
And
well, how do you feel as a historian when it's been documented that especially in Texas, they're trying to actually literally rewrite the history books. Yeah. They're changing things, and it seems to be kind of subtle.
They call slavery like employment. Or
Black people worked. Black people worked for their employers instead of these colored folk were slaves. Instead of saying it straightforward, they're prettying it up, and I don't know what. How are they getting away with that? What is wrong with our society that there's something that would allow that to happen? What's your thoughts on that as a historian?
I think my feeling is it goes back to the guilt thing, because they don't want to feel like
back to the guilt.
America is a bad place. My ancestors did something bad. I'm bad, right? And it's not. The thing is, again, you don't have to understand it like that, right? Like, slavery in general is bad. Slavery during the Roman Empire was bad, and the Romans were enslaving all kinds of people they didn't care about. But slavery is bad. You don't want to be a slave, right? It's something that happened throughout history. Everyone had slaves at one time or another, but slavery is bad, right? You can accept the fact that, my great grandfather fought for the Confederacy. That's not my decision. That was the time he grew up. That was who he was. Yeah. It was a bad thing, but that's what they were doing. And I mean, obviously there were other things involved. They felt like they were defending their land, right? It was a complex time. People had different ideas then, but that doesn't mean that you yourself have to invest in those ideas from over 150 years ago. You could say, you know what, my great grandfather was wrong, right? It doesn't have any bearing on my life today, right? I don't have any control of that. I don't have a time machine to go back.
Exactly.
But what I can do is recognize what happened and what the situation is. You just need to recognize the reality of what happened.
And then take it a step further and do something to fix it. Do something to clean it up. And again, I don't think that has to be, I don't think that.
I agree, but I think the easier thing to me is just have people first recognize the reality of what it was, right? Because that's the easier step, right?
Sure.
Because asking them to clean it up, I think is harder. Because
you got to crawl before you walk, and then you got to walk before you run. Absolutely.
That's why my thing is easier. Just understand what the reality is and treat all people fairly, right? That's what the reality of the situation was. because to a certain extent, I feel like you can do things. That's why I say just do what you think is fair, but you can never really fix that.
Right.
Like you can't, you can,
you can't fix the past, but you can make the present a lot more comfortable for everybody.
Well, yeah, that's why I say you should treat everyone fairly. So like when you pass away and when your ancestors remember you, they'll be like, well, these people back then were fair. Right. Yeah. Like they were fair. Like they try to do the right thing. Like people remember. So now, and that's the thing is, I think part of the problem we have in this country is that the South remembers, they hold up their Civil War leaders, right?
Yes,
Lee, Jackson, all those people. And in the North and the rest of the country, we don't really hold up the people that, you don't have anybody. No one talks about John Brown, what he did, right? Nobody talks about that. Like, and nobody talks about Grant or Sherman granted, some of these guys still had their racist ideas, but they were still like, you shouldn't break away from the Union, and this is the law, or whatever, or Lincoln, right? Like people who are much better examples, right? Like, so for instance, a lot of these people, these complaining, oh, you're going to take down the Lee statue. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take down a Lee statue, and we're going to replace it with a General Grant statue or an Abraham Lincoln statue, right?
Yeah.
Then let's see what the Southerners have to say, because that's our history too.
Sure.
Right? We are you going to protest that?
You know what? That's a good point. Instead of just taking them down, take them down, but replace them with as you say, Lincoln or Grant or
we
John
should say,
Brown.
Okay, well, John Brown. Yeah, I'd love to see what they have to say about the John Brown statue, right? Or we will keep your statue there, but we're going to put, for every Lee statue, we're going to put a Grant statue across the street.
Exactly,
because that's our history too.
That's
right?
our history. That's our heritage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. How many Abraham or how many Martin Luther King statues do we have up?
Yeah.
I'm only aware of one. Right.
Yeah.
This whole fucking statue thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's. It does represent a core. It represents a period of our history. Like some of these guys, Robert E. Lee was a complicated figure. The funny thing is, he wrote down, he's like, I don't want to have, which is the ironic thing is, he said himself, from the records that I read, he said, I don't want to have any statues to me.
That's right. I've read that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I don't want to have any statues to me. This was a bad period of our history, and we need to move on.
Yep.
And if anything, I think that's maybe some of the things that we need to honor about Robert E. Lee, or the things that we could find to honor about him, is that he really tried, especially General Longstreet. These guys really tried after the war. Because some of them, like Forrest, went on to create Ku Klux Klan and do the wrong thing. But we had some of them that were like, you know what? It's over. We lost. We tried. It's time for us to all be Americans again. Yeah. And even he, specifically Robert E. Lee, he went, I think it was a week or 2 weeks after the war, and he went and prayed next to an African-American guy. Right.
Well, I saw
that was a huge deal.
Yeah. And I saw back not just that kind of thing just didn't happen. And then here you have the guy who was, But I saw
some trying to say, we need to move on. We need to bind up the wounds.
Well, I saw something on the news. This was way back during the McCain, when McCain was making a run for the presidency. When was that? 2011 or so?
2008, John McCain.
2008.
2008, yeah.
And during that time, something came up about the statues and whatnot, and I believe it was Lee's great-great-grandson or something came on and did a series of interviews on Fox News, on CNN, MSNBC, and he was telling people to just chill out with the statue stuff, because his great-great-great-grandfather never he specifically he brought it up, that he specifically said those are the kind of things that we don't need now after the Civil War. So, one thing I want to ask you, we're as we wind down here, we got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Your podcast, History of the Cold War podcast. Now, you have a background in history. That's what you have a master's degree in history. But why focus on the Cold War? That's an interesting choice for a man of your age.
Sure. So I think the reason why, why would you focus on the Cold War? Why would you be interested in that? I think the thing is that the Cold War really, as I was growing up and as I started to understand the issues I was looking at the time, like the invasion of Iraq, the war on terror, a lot of the situation, our world today, a lot of it, like NATO, why Russia is the way it is, why China is the way it is.
Yeah.
Again, in general, why the world's economy, like, people talk about neoliberal capitalism. They have all these discussions about other economic systems. Why is the world the way it is today?
Yeah.
And the reason is a lot of that has its roots in the Cold War and what was going on during that conflict that took place basically for 40 years, right? And that explains, why is Ronald Reagan so popular? Yeah. Why do conservatives believe what they believe? And now it's a little bit different post-Trump, and lead up to him, but there's still some of those elements in there. Why is it that way, right? And I think if you understand the Cold War, you understand the dynamics of that time, right? You get a really good understanding of why our politics are the way they are today, and not just in America, but around the world, and the geopolitical, and our economics too. Why are our economies more free market, liberal, neoliberalism versus socialists? Or why aren't there socialist? Many socialist countries. What happened? What happened with communism? Why? Because people today, especially people in my age group, and even the group coming after me, are asking a lot of these questions about Marxism and socialism. You have Bernie Sanders, and I think if you listen to that podcast, we start getting into a lot of those questions about how our current world came to be.
I see. Now that podcast requires a lot of research. Is that why you only put out 2 episodes a month, roughly?
Yeah. So we only put out 2 episodes a month, and it requires a lot of research. I have to do. Some of it I already know, but I obviously have to check my sources, and I have to write up a script and lay everything out. And
that's right. Yeah, it's scripted. Yeah, so that takes a lot of production time.
So it takes time for me to type up the script. I have a producer that I work with. He helps me to put it together. And what we do is we were going through the Cold War chronologically, covering all the topics. So we just, believe it or not, we've been doing the show for 4 years, but we just entered the
81st 1950s. Episode? And you're on the 81st episode now, right?
Yeah, we're on 81st episode right now. So we're talking about McCarthyism and the Second Red Scare at this point, and what that was like in the country at that time. And the forces behind that.
Is there anything going on in today's United States that can mirror or be compared to McCarthyism?
There's an interesting connection about McCarthyism, which I just recently found out about in the process of doing the show. Is that Roy Cohn, who was a very infamous lawyer, and he was the lawyer who persecuted or prosecuted the Rosenbergs, who were eventually, from what we understand, they were guilty in retrospect, but the case was like a mess, right?
It was a big spy. A big spy case, was it not?
Yeah.
You're talking about the husband and wife team.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Rosenbergs was a husband-wife team. Yeah. They had been they were basically American communists, and they had Julius Rosenberg, the husband, had joined the U.S. Army. They had been recruited by the NKVD, which is the Soviet KGB at the time. They changed the name on and off, and they were basically spying for the Soviets, and then his wife, Julius's Ethel Rosenberg, her maiden name was Greenglass. Her brother ended up working at Los Alamos National Laboratory on the atomic bomb, and they recruited their brother to the program along with some other physicists who basically got information back to the Soviets to help them build their atomic bomb.
So they are basically the thread from the U.S. nuclear program to the Soviets. And basically it's because of them that the Soviets were able to achieve nuclear capabilities. Yeah.
Yeah, so for a large part, there were other spies.
Just to give listeners the background on that.
Yeah. So then what happened was, at the time, we had broken, for a short period of time, we had broken Soviet diplomatic codes and this thing called Viona, right, which is a computer program. Obviously, early computer program. I use the word computer in air quotes.
Yeah.
And when they had broken this code through this program called Viona, we could read the decrypts, and we figured out, who one of the scientists were, and it led to a series of, basically we were able to prove that the Rosenbergs were guilty, but the government and the FBI didn't want to release this information that we had cracked their codes, because we didn't want them to know what we had, right? So we couldn't charge them on that. So we basically found these other, causes to prosecute them. And the FBI, or eventually, it was just a preordained thing. Like, there was a trial, but this trial was just so, they brought in Ethel's brother, who basically he confessed to being a spy, and then he confessed to passing information on to his brother-in-law and his sister, and then they got found guilty, and then they were executed. And they were the only people, I'm pretty sure they were the only people recently in American history that got executed for espionage by electric chair.
Right.
And it was super controversial at the time. Obviously, people on the left were like, oh, they're just being prosecuted, because they didn't know, again, because the government didn't declassify this about the Vienna decrypts until 1995.
Yeah.
So at the time, people were like, and for years afterwards, I remember in the early 90s when I was in school, people were still saying that this was a travesty and everything else, right, on the left, that this was just a witch hunt. But anyways, Roy Cohn, who prosecuted these people, actually went on after this, and he was one of Donald Trump's mentors in the early 1980s, right?
Yes.
So there's a direct connection between this time.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's just sort of, and the thing is, when you do more and more research for history, you see these people pop up, and you see these connections between people and these things that were going on. So, and McCarthyism was one of those periods in American history where there was a real danger. There was an espionage threat, but people were also using that threat for their own political ends, right? The Republicans had been out of power for 20 years at that point, roughly speaking, since the Great Depression, since they had lost. Yeah. And they were like, well, we need to get at the Democrats with something. And this was a tool for them to get at the Democrats, because there were not a lot, but there were a good number of socialists that were in the Democratic Party, because they were attracted to Roosevelt's New Deal. And during the 30s, communism wasn't a big concern, because the United States was trying to deal with the Depression. But obviously, during the Cold War, socialism became a big deal again, right? Because these people were actively working against American interests, and we had to get rid of them. So
But is that applicable today? Because socialism is such a dirty word. That's a metaphorical whip that people on the right have to try and lash people on the left with. Oh, you're a socialist, or you have socialist ideas.
And part of the reason why is because of McCarthyism, because the government at that time and society in general convince people, because the thing is, everyone was the government literally tried to attach socialism and criminal together. They wanted people to think socialist, criminal, bad, right? Because obviously we were in a contest with the communists at the time, and liberal Democrats did not push back against this label, because they, on one hand, recognized the threat that the Soviet Union obviously presented, and what their former fellow allies were doing.
So why would you think that socialism is such a dirty word today? Because there is no Soviet Union, at least not by name. Not by name.
There is no Soviet Union, but I would say, especially for older Americans, which makes up the majority of our voting base,
the shadow is still there.
The shadow is still there,
I see.
And it will. And so the thing is, too, socialism comes with a lot of baggage, right? Because it's not like it's not an, I mean, people are like, you have many people say, well, it wasn't tried before epically or something like that. No, there are socialist parties in Western Europe that are not like other socialist countries. But if you look at socialism in China, Cuba, Venezuela, many other places, East Germany, Yugoslavia, it was a hard-nosed repressive system that killed a lot of people.
And that's true, but what about democratic socialism here in Norway, for example? Why doesn't Bernie Sanders and those people step up and say, okay, socialism, and here's what it is? and then they can
Well, so the
describe
thing
it.
is,
Yeah.
but I would say that so that's another big argument though, because because he cites Denmark a lot, right? And even Denmark, the prime minister came out and said we're not socialists, right? Like, so the thing is, and that's the thing is, like, now in the modern context, the idea or the understanding of what socialism is has changed. So to me, when you talk about, okay, you talk to me about socialism, and even AOC has said this in different interviews. When you talk to me, I'm thinking textbook socialism, what I had to read in grad school, or when I had to read the giant, thick Marxist Das Kapital, right? When I was sitting there spending my Saturday nights reading Das Kapital, right? That's what I understand socialism is the workers control the means of production, or is it Marxist-Leninism, right? Like, I'm all of those academic debates. So you talk to me, people today are like, or other young people I engage with, and they're like, well, I want free healthcare and I want access to public education. That's, to me, it's not socialism, right? That's a social safety net. Right. So,
well, is it safe to call that? Is it safe to call that democratic socialism or social democracy? Then,
I would say personally, I mean, they're all euphemisms, but I would say to me, it's more social democracy, because but even the United States in the 1930s, right? You can have a capitalist system and have a social safety net.
Exactly.
Like, they're not. I think the thing is, people think that they're somehow mutually exclusive. Like,
right.
If you have a roaring capitalist economy, you can't have a social safety net. You can. You just tax. You just set up the mechanisms and the structures to have it. Like, it's not like. And if you have a social safety net, it doesn't mean that capitalism can't exist or that you need the state
and that's
to
what
run the economy. But I think people are now saying, like, well, and I think too, there are people there are hardcore communist people who are more radical, who see this as an opportunity, because they're saying, well, people don't understand that. So they're using it because they think that the government should control the economy, that it should be a command economy, right? Because they think that it won't function properly without a command economy. My belief is that you can have a social safety net, which we did in the United States for a long time, until we started to disassemble it, or we moved, I think, too far in the other direction. Yeah. You can and still maintain a capitalist system. And Norway is a perfect example. Does Norway have a social safety net? Yes, but Norway has a pretty capitalist society.
Absolutely. I mean, so is it a messaging problem then from the Democrats in America, that they should say, no, we're not talking about socialism, but we're talking about democratic socialism in the sense of a safety net, in the sense of certain regulations to ensure that are put in place for the betterment
I think politically, personally, I wouldn't even use it. I mean, if I was a politician, like Bernie Sanders probably could have won the election. Personally, I feel he could have won. I think his adherence to the socialist title and his adherence to
it's to his own disadvantage.
Castro and what was happening in China, his adherence to those ideas scare a lot of people.
Sure.
Right, especially the older generation, right?
Sure.
Because they remember, especially people in Florida, the Cuban community, remember what happened when Fidel Castro came to power, right? And all those people who were lined up in the parks and got their brains blown out. Yeah, he taught people to read, but that came at a cost, right? So, I mean, people are like, I want free healthcare, but I don't want my neighbors executed in the front lawn, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders would have done that, but that's the perception, and especially people on the right were going to make that perception, right? So if he would have said, I'm not a socialist, I just think this is what we should do. We should have healthcare. We need to establish a third New Deal, something like of that nature, right?
I wish he would have done that.
Did,
I wish that guy would have done that.
He would have got elected.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what FDR did. FDR was like, we need a New Deal. We need to be able to help build a social safety net in case people fall in hard times, or old people aren't dying on the streets or eating canned food, right? Like, that was how he won, right? Like, but I think when you wrap those kinds of messages, like, it would be, especially for people on the right, and they hear socialism, that the word is obviously very intimidating. It comes with a history. That would be like people on the right saying, you know what, I want democratic Nazism, right? Like, you can't discount the second word, right? Like, and they were like, well, what happened in the Third Reich was wrong with the Holocaust and everything, but we're gonna do it different this time, right? Yeah. People are gonna be like, what? Or democratic fascism, right? Like, people will be like, no, you can't know, because it comes with baggage. And I think people on the left don't realize.
I should go out there as a democratic
people who grew up.
I should go out there as the Democratic Jim Crow candidate.
Yeah, so people, especially people who grew up in Cambodia, or people like my wife who come from China, people who come from Cuba, when you use that word socialism, they are understanding it from their context of what they grew up in, real socialist systems.
Yeah.
And you may tell them that's not real socialism, but don't.
The word is going to ring in their mind.
The word's going to, and they're going to be like, well, I don't want any part of that, right? So when you march under that banner, you have to realize the history that comes with that banner, for better or worse.
Yeah, that's kind of like how Trump tried to rebrand the word nationalist.
Yeah,
tried to turn that into a good thing. It's not going to work. The word in its context is going to still resonate the way it always has for decades.
Yeah. Because I think, nationalism, because, you have nationalist Spain, nationalism has traditionally been like a right-wing aspect.
Right.
I sort of understand what he was saying, because he was talking about more like patriotism. And I think there is a level of patriotism that's required, because nationalism, in a sense, is not necessarily a bad thing.
But I'm sure someone in his advisor, in his cabinet, some advisor told him, hey, this is why people are getting so upset when you're using that word nationalist, because this is what it means. I'm sure someone told him that, but he just digs in and doubles down.
Well, I think, he loves to double down. I think the other thing is he has more controversial figures around him, people like Steve Bannon or Stephen Miller, right, who are these very controversial kind of hard right kind of figures who they embrace these types of philosophies. So, for them, they almost want to trigger people. They want to say nationalist, because that's clearly defining where they stand and what they believe in, right? So
what's your prediction for November? As a man of history, you've seen the ebb and flow in the political world.
I will tell you what history tells me, but I think we are living in I think each generation thinks they are living in extraordinary times, but I honestly think this is an extraordinary time. So we have once in a century or so pandemic, that is happening during the middle of an election. So I don't know how that's going to affect things. The other caveat I would throw out there is I don't know. We have had foreign interference in our elections before, but not like this. I think what the FSB or the Russian intelligence services and what other intelligence services are capable of doing now, they haven't been capable of doing before. I think the other caveat I would throw out there is that the media landscape is so diverse and so splintered. It's hard to a lot of people are in echo chambers, and it's hard to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. You used to have three major channels who would give you, and that's why you saw major, the landslides that we saw with Richard Nixon in 72 or Reagan in 84, those types of just almost every state votes for that type of president. Yeah. I think we are probably unlikely to see that again anytime in the near future, right? Where America is totally united behind one party or idea. All that being said, I think that Donald Trump is going to lose, in my opinion. And I could 100% be wrong, but this is the reason I say that he is. I think if you, look at the numbers that we have, and what history tells us is that no president, that's two big things that I see. One is no president that's been this unpopular leading up to the election has ever been reelected, right? That just hasn't happened. I think the other thing is the economy. Like the last two presidents who tried to run in a down economy, and by all estimates, because of the pandemic, we're going to have the worst economy since the Great Depression, if not worse, given the unemployment numbers, right?
Yeah.
So given the example of Jimmy Carter and George Bush the first, I don't think that he's going to be able to come back from that. I mean, it's not impossible for him to win, because obviously he's going to try to win like he did last time with an electoral victory. But it's going to be really, really hard to walk that line, because he basically has to keep everything he won last time, right? He can't lose anything. He has to basically maintain the hold on all the states that he had.
And it would appear that things have gotten worse for him in some of the key states, much worse than they were leading up to the previous election.
At this moment,
Yeah.
it looks like he's worse. Now, granted, something could always change.
And
right?
and Jimmy Carter and Bush the first are no Donald Trump. Now, I am not a fan of Donald Trump, but there is something rather, I can use the word remarkable about him. He's an anomaly. He's you can't compare. I don't know. He's so weird. The whole situation around him is so weird. I don't think it can be compared to any previous president. I get the comparison leading up to this election. It can be compared with Bush the first and with Carter. I get that. But again, there's something so different and so crazy about Trump
and that's why I say you're kind of. I say this is what history tells me.
But you won't bet on it.
We're living in unprecedented times because he is very charismatic. I mean, that's the one thing he has. And most of the times in elections, people vote for the person who's charismatic, and he definitely has that in spades, right? You may not like what he says. You may think he's, whatever, but you have to admit the man is charismatic. People like him.
His base is solid.
His base is loyal. And then the other thing that he has is he is very he has a very shrewd understanding of the media and how to craft a narrative, right? And how to change the message, right? More so than any other president I've ever seen. I mean, he's had horrible things happen to him. He got impeached, and he was able to make the whole impeachment into him being a victim, right? And we're pretty sure he was guilty of what they were saying he was guilty of. And he said, and his lawyers argued that he's above the law, right? And which kills me because most of the time Republicans would not. I mean, but you almost have the Republican Party to a certain extent backing a monarchist kind of perspective
and that just blows my mind. I think that's just the world is turned upside down when things like that start happening. It's crazy times.
Yeah, it is definitely crazy times, and he has such a vice grip over the Republican Party and over his base that they're totally scared to say anything against him or to go against him.
So he has his base, but I think I'm with you. I'm going to predict. I won't bet on it, but I will predict that he's going to be moving on to something else come November.
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I mean, because the thing is, too, he's lost a lot. Obviously, the women's vote, he's lost a lot there. And he's lost a lot in the suburbs. He's lost a lot with college-educated whites. I mean, he basically has his base of uneducated white workers, right? But I don't know if that's enough, right, to be able to win those states again. And the thing is, now granted, maybe Biden somehow extremely, he offends African Americans somehow, and they all just decide they're not going to turn out. I mean, I doubt that, but it's been pretty crazy recently. So
I'm just gonna give a shout out. Yeah, I'm gonna give a shout out to Black America. Both of you who are out there listening to me. I joke, but in all seriousness, I don't understand, and I don't know the numbers, but I'm gonna assume that it's less than 3% of Black Americans are supporting Donald Trump. And I can't imagine there being more than that. The man is quite obviously, if not anti-Black, he is far from pro-Black.
Oh, yeah. I think that's to me, like he's not even, I mean, the thing to me, I guess in my mind is that his primary concern is himself. And then after that, his immediate family.
There you go.
So, yeah. I mean, I don't even know.
He's not pro anything. He's in it
he's pro Donald Trump, right? And what his image is. I think he, beyond that, his, especially the thing is his competency level. I mean, the way that he's handled this pandemic, just my humble opinion, hasn't been the best.
Yeah.
And we're trying to live through what's going on here. It's just.
We agree too much. I want to find somebody who is just a blazing MAGA hat wearing Trump supporter. I want to get somebody like that on here and just and without all the foolishness and the hyperactivity that you find on social media. I just want to talk to a diehard Trump supporter and just let them state their case. I truly, and I don't say this to try to be funny. I'm not saying this to try to talk down to Trump supporters, but I truly cannot understand why they support that man. He is the most, well, I'm not going to say what I think he is, but I'll leave it there. I don't understand why people support him. I really don't. I don't see what they see in him.
I've had a few conversations with people in reference to that. I don't understand. I haven't heard anything to really change my mind. I try to always be a very open-minded person about.
Me too.
The one thing I have heard that kind of makes sense to me is that he follows more or less the conservative agenda. He's pretty tight on that in terms of.
Yeah, but does he?
This is what
I don't see
have
it.
heard.
Yeah.
So this is what they say. I mean, there's other elements that he doesn't follow, but they have said. This is not my opinion. This is
this is what you've heard. Yeah.
So they say that he is very strong on. There's a perception that he's strong in defense. I disagree with this, but there is a perception that he's strong in defense. And I would say that he's been moderate on defense. I don't really see him strong in that, but that's a whole other discussion. The other one is that he is obviously there's a perception that he's good with the economy. To me, I give presidents some credit on the economy, but I think their decisions that they decide, it takes like 4 or 5 years for that to really start affecting the economy. Right. So it's really hard to see in their first term how effective they've been in the economy. But I understand you with the economy thing, you live or die by it, right? And it's most of the time it's not your fault.
Right.
But it is what it is, right? So some people give him credit for that. The other one is obviously the judges, which I see is that he has put in pretty conservative Supreme Court justices. So I guess that I see that. And then, obviously if the religious freedoms, because they feel like that even though he is not religious himself, he's really gone to the bat and did everything they want him to do in regards to those freedoms. And they kind of see him as a transactional president. Not a person that they would tell their kids, like, I want you to grow up to be, but someone who gets the job done.
I see.
And so that's their perception is like, okay, I'm going to vote for him because he gets the job done.
I see.
Personally, not to give too much away, I normally don't share. Obviously, in my podcast, I don't share my political opinions, but because it's not that type of podcast.
No, you're just getting into the history on your podcast.
Yeah, I'm just explaining what happened, who did what, where, and when. But with this, I just don't think that he just hasn't done a good job in my honest opinion of being a president. From an organizational point of view, he doesn't seem like, he runs roughshod over the bureaucracy. He's always involved in these fights which don't get anything done. Yeah. I think, he engages in this banter of just, and calling people names, which I don't think is in any way beneficial. And I really gave him a shot when he first became president. I know a lot of people were opposed. I said, well, he's the president now.
Well, I wanted him to succeid. I don't want our president to fail. Yeah, I want him to do a good job because that's going to be good for the country. So I wanted them to do a great job. I mean, but he, his actions, his whole deal with Russia, which I don't understand. Oh, I do. They got some dirt on him. There's some dirt.
I suspect.
Absolutely. There's something there.
There's something there. What it is, I don't understand.
It's not natural. It's an unnatural relationship. Yeah.
Especially the way that he treats everyone else and then the way he treats Putin. He always treats him with such differential. I think he's handled the whole China thing wrong, how he's dealt with them. I think I agree with his temperament that they should be dealt with hardly. Right? I don't think that China is a friend. I do think China is a threat. I agree with his attitude on it. I just disagree with the way that he goes about. Yeah. He doesn't build alliances to isolate them. He just he fights everyone. He fights Canada. He fights Mexico. He fights the Europeans. And I just don't think that that's a way to build alliances or get things done. Right? If fighting everyone doesn't no. You can only fight one war at a time, right? First deal with the bigger threat, and to me the bigger threat is China, and then worry about how Canada's not letting us sell eggs there, right? Like, China is trying to steal our intellectual property, and Canada's stopping, and they're trying to become, the world superpower versus Canada, who just won't let us sell their eggs there. There's a proportionality to the situation, right? Which I think he loses sometimes. And again, like I said, the calling the names, the whole thing when what was it in Virginia when he was like, well, everyone's equal. What was that with
both sides? There's good people on both sides.
Yeah, there's good people on both sides. There's no good neo-Nazis. Like there are no good Nazis, right? Like there were. I mean, I can take that back. There were people who generally don't believe in it, who tried to undermine the Nazi system, but they were stuck in it. But there are no good neo-Nazis. Today there are no people that were if you were adherent to that philosophy, I'm sorry, you're not a good person.
No,
it's not.
Yeah.
So those kinds of those types of comments. Is a couple of weeks back when he told people to drink bleach. That those you're just endangering people, right? The people are trying to look to you for an emergency. To organize.
I guess people are so quick. People are so quick to explain away gaffes like that. They'll try to say, "Well, he didn't mean it like that. He meant it this way." Well, why are you, a citizen, trying to explain what your president really meant? He said what he said, and people are going to be misled by that. People are going to take it unfiltered and then go out and try that. I mean, that man has to take responsibility for what he says, and it seems like he just says whatever the first thing that comes to his mind. I don't know if it's intentional or is the man too old for office? Is he starting to babble? I don't know. But the thing is,
to me, that's just who he is. Well, that's just who he is.
But what gets me though, is that his base will try to explain it away.
But yeah. Well, so what I would ask because the thing is, and I always ask myself this too, because you always have to put your shoe on the other foot to see if you're being fair. And I don't think that we do that enough in America. Is if it had been Obama who had said something like that, would you have accepted it? No. And would you be right to accept it? No. It would, like, if Obama had something like that, and obviously the right would be going nuts, and they would be
well within their rights. Yeah,
I would just to say that. Has Obama done things? And especially, I didn't vote for Obama, right? Like, I voted for McCain and Mitt Romney, right? I voted. I was a pretty straight Republican. I mean, I guess I was more leftish center Republican, but I voted for both those guys. Yeah. And, the same thing right now the same thing I think is funny to me is what's happened to Romney. When Romney ran in 2012, they basically made the man out to be like the most evil guy ever, right?
And look at him now.
Basically, they said that the Democrats said that he attached his dog to his roof of his car and went cross country. Yeah. They said, he was, he made some comments that probably weren't the best, but nothing close to what we have now. And now, because, Mitt Romney came out during the impeachment and voted for it. Yeah. Right. Which was the right thing to do. Now the left holds him up as a sovereign saint. Right.
A golden child.
Well, the thing is and then people on the right just kind of see through that. And it's I think this, I don't want to get to a two sides thing, but I do see the point that people in general, and especially in American politics, you have to sometimes think am I being fair to this person? Because I think the problem is American politics has devolved into my team, his team, right?
Yeah, yes.
And it used to be, politics in this country used to be, especially I remember in the early 90s, right? You have shows where you could have the Speaker of the House and the opposition person come on, and they could have a rational conversation about what needs to be done in the country and what the challenges our country faces. We don't have that anymore. No. Politics used to be about solving problems that we had. And to me, it's all about finding the solutions to the problems we have. We have a healthcare problem. We have millions of people. We all agree there's a healthcare problem. Right.
They spend so much time fighting about it, but there's so little movement. There's nothing changing.
The Democrats have their solution. 100%. I can understand why a lot of Republicans don't agree with their solution.
But where's theirs?
Solutions?
Exactly.
They haven't come up with one. Right.
Exactly.
So then you need to develop one. You need to come out with some kind of solution. So I think the problem is we've moved way too into, or the Democratic one is they want all these programs. How are you going to pay for them? Right? Yeah. How do you pay for this? How do you pay for all that and still balance? Now we're going to have to deal with the whole China-Russia thing. Right. Because you're going to have to deal with that. So you're going to have to spend money on that. Right. So where do you find the money? So the thing is, and the Democrats, that's when both sides go now. So now they used to try to struggle with answering these questions. Now they don't even. Now they just all going to do a his team thing.
Well, AOC has a good answer on how to fund a lot of these different programs that the left wants to put in place. And her answer is, and Tulsi Gabbard had the same answer: stop fighting all these wars.
Well, the thing is, like, so the thing is, like, I understand. So military wars have to be. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you don't.
Sure.
Right?
But do we need to have a 20-year war going on in the Middle East now? Do we need that?
Probably
really?
not. But the thing is, that's in retrospect, right? Because the thing is, you're still going to need to spend money on defense because you're still, like I said, now you have a whole new challenge with Russia and China, which are major power challenges, which are going to be expensive to deal with, right? So the thing is, because you cannot not tell me now that Russia and China aren't a threat or they're not a challenge that we're just going to let over on the side. Because, again, back in 2012, Romney said, Russia's a problem. We need to deal with Russia.
Wow.
Obama said, Russia's a third-rate power. What did Russia do? Russia came in, kicked us in the face, and took our sandwich because they got involved in our election and they got Donald Trump elected. It's almost ironic what Obama said now when you look at it, right? And Mitt Romney was like, no, we have to deal with these people. You may think they're a third-rate power, but they spend most of their money and their time on how are we going to screw over the Americans.
Well, right? the thing is I don't see that America, but I don't see that America is in a position to properly deal with China and Russia, deal with them wholeheartedly, as long as we are spending so much money as we've spent in the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, I agree.
Totally,
so we're gonna have to,
it's not possible. Yeah. It's not possible.
Yeah. But you're going to have to. So we're going to have to find a solution to those problems, right? To Iraq. I mean, Iraq's basically we're more or less out of Iraq.
Yeah.
We still have some elements there.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, we have to figure out how the hell we're going to get out of there. That's still a problem. Yeah. But I still think, obviously we want to do the healthcare thing. We want to do the education thing the Democrats are talking about. We have to obviously do the infrastructure thing. These are all things we have to do, right? Yeah. These are all things I think both sides is right on that we have to deal with. But it's like now we have to figure out, and we're going to have to tax people more. It's unfortunate. I don't like paying taxes, but you're also going to have to tax our friend Jeff Bezos and the rest of these billionaires.
I was just going to say, taxing the people,
their fair share,
taxing the people and taxing corporate America are two different things. I don't believe the people need to be taxed more, but I'd like to see the corporate. Oh, yeah. Are you there? There you are. I'd like to see the corporate fat cats pay their fair share. I don't want to take their money, and I put that in air quotes. I don't want to take their money, but I do want to see that they are taxed on their fair share, which they are not today. And also something so simple as I believe it was Bernie Sanders who came up with the idea of imposing a transaction tax on Wall Street.
Yeah, I don't know the transaction tax. So the thing is, and this gets into I don't know about the transaction tax because the transaction tax might, I have to plug my phone in real quick. That might cause other problems, unintended consequences, right? Because every time you introduce taxes, it causes unintended consequences. So you have to look at whatever those consequences might be.
Well, maybe the best time to do a transactional tax would be now. The market is jacked up already.
But now you want transactions in the market, though, because now you want the market. I mean, because if we were at the top of the market, transaction costs might make sense because people are going to trade anyways. But now it's like putting another incentive for people not to trade, right? Because now they're like, well, the market's already bad. Maybe it shouldn't trade, and now I'm going to be paid. I have to pay extra to trade. So you're slowing down trade.
Well, you just heard why I don't work in finance.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, I see that we're going to have some new taxes. We're going to have to redo the tax structure. Yeah. Businesses are going to have to pay more. But I think just in general, everyone's going to have to pay more because if you're looking at all the Bernie Sanders thing with what he was proposing, you start adding up the numbers of what they're proposing, you've got to find that money from somewhere, right? Either you're going to have to scale back the programs, or you're going to have to have them or think about having them in such a way that we can afford them, right? So I'm not saying that we give up on these ideas or these things, these challenges that we have, but we have to have some new thinking.
Yeah, we have to have some new thinking. But I don't think families that make less than $200,000 need to have more taxes. I think it's the people on the other side, on the higher end, that need to start paying their fair share.
But I mean, given the programs that we're having, we're probably all going to have to. I mean, because again, it gets back to well, if we don't want to pay more taxes, because the thing is, like, the education for all, right? Well, let's say college education for all, right? I'm in support of that, but I guess if you're making a certain dollar amount, or your family makes a certain dollar amount, you probably shouldn't qualify. Millionaires' kids should not qualify, right? Yeah. It just seems like it's simple enough to me, right? Because that's a lot of money that we could be saving. So that's one thing. The other thing is, is that obviously certain private colleges shouldn't be funded. We need to, how the universities spend their money, because the universities spend a lot of their money on facilities and stuff, which is just a racket, right? So they're not using that money is not going to professors and teachers, right? That money is going into buying
buildings. Hey, come on now. The Ohio State Buckeyes got to have a great stadium to win those championships.
Exactly. So the thing is, how is that money being utilized? How is that money being spent, right? And the thing is, the states also need to chip in more, right? We just can't have the federal government just piling up debt. Because the thing is that people don't realize is the states have continually cut what they're giving to education. Now, granted, some of that is because of what's happened in recent recessions and whatever. But, well, if the state doesn't restore the funding, well, then the federal government shouldn't be on the hook to come up with that funding, right? So if the states need to, they need to manage their budgets more appropriately. They need to bring down, because some of it is fluff. The universities have to run thinner budgets, and that doesn't mean cutting teachers' budgets. Maybe, the university presidents shouldn't be paid like $500,000 a year. Maybe they should only be paid $250,000 a year, right? Or $100,000 a year. So that money has to come from somewhere, and we need to reevaluate how we're doing our university system. Because the other thing is, we've also gotten addicted to the cheap inflow of students from China, right? Who have basically been funding our universities. So obviously that's going to go away once we move away from China. So how do we restructure all that?
Well, I tell you, there's a lot of questions like that are just kind of hanging in the air, and it doesn't seem that anyone is grabbing a hold and taking charge. I tell you, the conversation we're having, I hope it's being had by people with a lot more influence than you and I have. But it just seems like nothing is changing. There's no movement. There's no movement.
Yeah, because I think the problem is we're stuck in a game mentality. We're not stuck in it. I think our politics is not stuck in a we need to solve problems mentality. It's stuck in I got you. I got that one line zinger. You watch the debate, it's not a dialogue about the problems we have and how we're going to solve them.
It's one-liners it's one-liners and gotchas. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like at one point I remember Kamala Harris said, "Oh, she's just going to do this. She's just going to get whatever." And Joe Biden's like, "You just can't do that. Like it's unconstitutional." Yeah. And her response was, "Well, Joe Biden, sometimes you just got to say not say no and just say yes, right?" And it's like,
what kind of answer is that? Yeah.
What kind of answer? That's And then the other thing is, I think if people forget, we live in a democracy, right? And like I saw somebody the other day was like, well, somebody who was Bernie Sanders supporter was basically they made it, and this was an article from Salon, which I know is left leaning, but they said, Bernie Sanders people and the far left need to demand these things from the Democratic Party. We need to get these demands, right? And I'm like, democracy doesn't work like that. Democracy, because they're like, we need to stop with compromises, we need to get demands. I'm like, democracy is about dialogue and
compromise, yeah.
That's democracy. I mean, I know you don't like. I mean, I know people don't like it because you don't get everything you want.
But that's what it is.
That's democracy.
That's what it is.
Otherwise, because to be making demands and telling people what to do, that's called authoritarianism. Yeah. Right. That's a whole other system. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And that's a system supposedly that we're against. And I think not a lot of Americans realize this system is about dialogue and compromise. How can we work together to achieve the best society that we can achieve versus, especially when we have a lot of problems that we have to deal with. We might not have the best solution to these problems, but a halfway solution is better than us just letting these problems just keep on kicking it down the road because I want to score points against somebody else by saying you guys are idiots.
Well, I hope people stop taking score. I hope they stop looking for the one-liners and the zingers and I gotcha. And I hope all that stuff stops and we start getting back to some. Let's go old school. Let's go back to the Cold War times when the parties were somewhat united in at least in their desire to have a better America for everybody. Now it just seems to be that one political side wants things better for their followers, for their base, and that's not America. That's not America.
Yeah, that's not America at all. And I think,
So
I mean, we could definitely go on and on about this subject.
Listen, man, we've this has been a great podcast, but we've been talking for almost 2 hours and 15 minutes. This is this has been a long one.
yeah, definitely.
But listen, let's cut it short. I gotta run.
Same here.
But I want to thank you for coming on, Jeff, and I will definitely point people in the direction of your podcast. I think
I appreciate that.
I've listened to several episodes. It's real interesting stuff. If you're a history buff, well, that's not true. Even if you're not a history buff, go and listen to Jeff's podcast because you might find a new interest there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for coming on, and you have an open invitation. You're always welcome here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, like we should have an episode with myself and Salve sometime because I think that would be an interesting conversation.
We're going to do that. She's I've never met her in person, but she's extremely interesting, and I love her sense of humor as well. So
yeah, she's a very interesting person. She has that was one of the things I initially liked about her too. She has very, very interesting political views.
Yeah,
she has like this really interesting mixture of like California libertarian and like Norwegian social democratic views that like meld together in this like interesting hodgepodge that I call Solveism. So yeah,
I love it. No, I'll get you both on here for a three-way conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right, Jeff. Well, thanks a lot, man. Take care of yourself.
Okay. You too. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, everybody. This turned into something of a political discussion. But I did get in what I wanted to get in, which was the interesting life that Jeff has had. He met a little bit of adversity there, and he kind of remade himself and kept his focus and made a life out there in California, and he's doing just fine. So, thank you all for coming and listening to this episode of the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. Bye, everybody.
I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I am. Yes, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I am.